What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and Marvel has officially rebooted the Ultimate Universe. As always, you'll find a link to the playlist at the end of the video in case you need to get caught up, but this is self-contained, so it's pretty easy to follow. So this initially picks up basically in Asgard with the Ultimate Universe's version of Doctor Doom and Iron Man. Now again, this is all kind of starting from scratch, so you don't need to have read anything before this to understand what's going on. The long and short of this, and it'll be explained exceedingly well, is that these guys are here in Asgard to grab somebody. And as they're kind of looking around, making sure that like the jig's not up, like there's no guards coming or anything along those lines, Dr. Doom looks through the little peephole and he asks the question, "Can you hear me? Is anyone in there?" And this guy's response is, "Go away," right? "I don't want food, I don't want drink. I desire neither company nor conversation. Do yourself a favor and walk away," right? But the cool thing is that Dr. Doom's like, "That's cool, man, because we're not here with food or water. We're here with freedom." So they literally blow the door down and get this guy out, only for us to find out it's the Ultimate Universe version of Thor. Now, let me tell you guys something, man. There's like the main Marvel Universe version of Thor, right? You walk into a comic book store right now and you say, "I want to read a Thor comic." They're going to give you a comic book that comes from the main Marvel Universe. And he's kind of cool sometimes, I guess, depending on the situation. Like when he beat the crap out of Iron Man, that was amazing. But by and large, he's just like the guy who's there, who's the king of Asgard. Thor in the Ultimate Universe, son, this guy doesn't give a damn. Dude, this guy will attack and crush anybody who's foolish enough to come against him. Kind of a funny thing, in the original Ultimate Universe, he was introduced as what was basically a crazy guy. He was locked in a mental institution because he was just some dude babbling around about how he was like the son of Odin, right? Like the kind of thing that crazy people say. But nonetheless, this guy is like the definition of hardcore. And so once Dr. Doom, and we can call him Iron Lad, even though Tony Stark goes by the name Iron Lad, right? That's all I kind of explained here in a second. Thor ends up traveling to what is kind of like the throne of Asgard and ends up coming across Lady Sif. Now, one of the cool things that's still intact here is that in the main Marvel Universe, and in fact, they're continuing it here in the Ultimate Universe, but in the main Marvel Universe, Heimdall was for years and years and years the guy who stood watch at Asgard and saw everything going on across the 9 realms. Nothing escaped his gaze, which is creepy when you think about it. But in more recent years, Heimdall was killed and his sister Sif took his place. In the Ultimate Universe, they're very much continuing this thread. Now, it's not really hit on in any uncertain terms, right? It's not like an obvious thing, but what it looks like here is much like in the main Marvel Universe, Thor and Lady Sif have a romantic history together. And that's by and large just kind of like a core part of their character's history. So much so that when Adam Warlock first appeared in Marvel Comics, the dude literally took off to space and tried to like force Sif to marry him. And like him and Thor got into a fight. It was like Adam Warlock's second appearance in Marvel Comics. Now, one of the things that happens here is that Lady Sif refers to Thor as a traitor. For those of you guys who didn't see the original 4 videos that we did that led into this reboot, it's okay. It'll actually be explained over the course of this. So give me like 2 or 3 minutes and you won't feel left out. But the thing about this is that Thor is literally just waiting on Mjolnir, right? Like he's gone to get his hammer. And that's one of the cool things, because at the end of the day, these other Asgardians step up with the intention of like challenging him, defeating him, forcing him back into his cell, and probably taking Iron Man and Doctor Doom prisoner as well, right? The response of Iron Man, not a chance. Blast these guys and is like, "Get your hammer and let's go, man." Like if hitting nails means that much to you, right? Grab your hammer, let's go. And the funny thing is that this Asgardian makes this comment and he says, "If you want Mjolnir so bad, come and get it, traitor." And the response of Thor is, "Has it been so long that Asgard has forgotten? I don't have to." And he just summons the hammer to himself. It's pretty dope. And then he becomes like the Thor that we're all familiar with. Kind of a funny thing, right? The version of Thor that you saw in really like Infinity War and Avengers Endgame with like the 6 lights on his chest, that was from the original Ultimate Thor. In fact, his original hammer was powered through technology, and then eventually he got Mjolnir later on down the line in the Ultimate Universe. It was actually pretty dope, to be honest with you guys. If you never read the original Ultimate Universe Thor, I mean, it was a little wonky for a little while, but it was also pretty cool at certain times. But Thor kind of helps these Asgardians understand their place in the bigger picture, that when you mess with the bull, you get the horns, you know what I mean? Like, just starts dominating these guys and then leaves with Iron Man. And so once that happens, he actually activates the Bifrost and teleports them away. And in fact, Sif is actually pulled through it, or seemingly jumps through it. And so at that point, you pick up with New York and Stark Tower and the discovered remnants of Captain America. Now, one of the things that I want to specify here is that Captain America in the original Ultimate Universe, and we don't know if they're going to do it this way here, but in the original Ultimate Universe, he was not the first recipient of the Super Soldier Serum. He's not the original. That was Samuel Jackson Nick Fury in the comics, right? Like the black guy Nick Fury. He was the first one to get the Super Soldier Serum. He took off, right? Just vanished, went underground. Nobody could ever find him. But because they knew it worked, then they gave it to Steve Rogers. It was kind of a big change between like the main Marvel Universe and the Ultimate Universe, which I liked. Now, the kicker about all this is that while they are able to analyze the body of Steve, and they are able to decipher or at least determine that there seem to be vital signs there indicating that he's alive, what you also get is this kind of discussion about the Super Soldier Serum. But what they don't know is what will happen if they just shatter the glass, right? Will it shatter his body with it? Who knows what's going to happen? And so before they do anything, they're kind of like waiting to find a more safer way of getting him out. So you get this really cool moment where like Thor's talking to him, right? Like he asks Iron Man, like, can he hear us? And his response is like, we don't fully know, right? Like he shouldn't fully regain consciousness until we're further along and thawing him out. And the response of Thor is, so he might. And if he might, then there are words that should be said. And he says, hear me, brother, I would free you now, as I would free any chains who deserve them not, were the risks not grave and the cost so high. But you have my word, should the time come when such a choice must be made, you will be freed. Better to die as such than helpless and hopeless, trapped in a frozen hell. Now that's like perfect example of Ultimate Thor. This guy was all about speeches, man, and they were like some of the most dope speeches ever. The only instance of there being like a speech that Thor gave in, oh my God, in Marvel Comics that was not in the Ultimate Universe was in Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, the last ride of Thor and Hyperion. Do you guys remember that? Son, man, like Hyperion's like, Thor, will you wait for me in Asgard? And he's like, brother, today I will race you there. And they like charge headlong into an army of the Beyonders and just get annihilated. It's amazing. Like it's just one of the coolest moments ever in the history of Marvel Comics. We'll have another link to that in the end of this video in case you just want to watch that video. It's really, really amazing, right? It's really, really cool. But what they end up finding out is that like Lady Sif is there with them. And it's one of these things where she's like, those are strong words, right? But promising freedom when you don't even have your own seems disingenuous, Thor. And what you get here is kind of an unspoken alliance of sorts, right? And the reason for that is because Lady Sif doesn't actually know what's going on, and not even Thor fully knows what's going on. As far as Lady Sif is concerned, this is the way things have always been. This is the way things are supposed to be. That Thor is a traitor to the throne of Asgard, that he had killed Odin, Loki took his place, and that was it, right? The response of Dr. Doom and of Iron Man is actually none of what you're seeing here is real. None of this is how it's supposed to be. And when the question that's asked is, how so? The response of Iron Man is, you're supposed to be the king of Asgard, Thor. You were supposed to succeed your father as king, not to be branded a traitor and thrown into a prison cell for the rest of your days. And so what Dr. Doom does is he gives this kind of just great explanation on what's going on, which I'll give you guys here for those of you guys who either need to get caught up or need a refresher, right? What he says is, the ruler of this earth, our imperator, is a man called the Maker. And while he's trapped inside his quote unquote future city, this just giant dome that exists out there in the world, we are presented with an opportunity. We can change this world back into the world it was supposed to be. You have to understand, and this is the heart of the matter, the Maker is from a different universe, and he arrived here with a very specific mission: to systematically erase the world's heroes from existence. Now, before we continue on, this is something that I want to explain here because it is an important thing. So in Marvel Comics, the Ultimate Universe is known as Earth 1610. 1610. You guys know that from the Miles Morales Beyond Spider-Verse, Into the Spider-Verse. You know, Spider-Verse is like the greatest movie ever in the history of comic book movies, that whole franchise, right? Like, you guys know that. The thing about this and what's really kind of cool is the Ultimate Universe did return kind of after Secret Wars in 2015. Hickman's ignoring all of that. As far as we're concerned, the Ultimate Universe has been gone ever since the collapse of the multiverse at the end of his Avengers New Avengers run and the start of Secret Wars. The Maker comes from that original Ultimate Universe, just like Miles Morales did. The difference is that the Maker ended up going into the multiverse to either try to find the original Ultimate Universe, or if he couldn't find it, to basically terraform to change another universe into the Ultimate Universe that he remembers. That's what he did here. The Doctor Doom kind of continues on and he says the Maker was able to do this by denying them the circumstances and the events that would have transformed them into what they were supposed to be. He was able to do that because he arrived in our universe with the knowledge of the history of our Earth's heroes. And when Sif asks, how can you know such a thing? The response of Doom is, because when I was his prisoner, a captive and a tool for decades, I was able to steal his files. So I know what the Maker knows. And so what they're looking to do here is basically set things back to rights by going through and saying, okay, so here's what's supposed to happen. Thor is supposed to be the king of Asgard, so we have to fix that. We end up getting just like these really amazing, I guess kind of like this list of where these different superheroes stand. That Steve Rogers is quote unquote undefined. Nobody necessarily knows, right? Bucky Barnes, he's believed to be dead. That Robert Grayson is inactive, right? Jack Monroe is inactive. Thor Odin's son is inactive. And the list kind of goes on and on and on. Reed Richards is controlled. And in fact, for those of you guys who weren't following the original story, this version of Doctor Doom that you see is Reed. It's this reality's version of Reed Richards, not Victor Von Doom, right? So it's kind of a change from what we're used to, right? Ben Grimm, dead. It's all these things where like these heroes that we're familiar with are basically done and gone. Now, guys like Bruce Banner, the Incredible Hulk, they're listed as being controlled because he's a part of what's called the Illuminati. But what these guys have to do here is in turn, go and grab the files that the Maker had hidden in a different location. We end up discovering that this location is Latveria, but Latveria is not home to Victor Von Doom. And in fact, and seemingly Latveria was at some point a kind of main base of operations for the Maker, which seems pretty ironic. The fact that he had Doom under his control, and that while it's not really Victor Von Doom, at the end of the day, it still seems so similar enough that it still kind of works. But once they make their way through a force field, and Thor, of course, helps them do it by just using his hammer and busting the thing down because, you know, Thor's amazing. What Doom says is that once they found all these different artifacts, they have to be wary of the fact that there will be defenses, right? That these repositories, these just gigantic containers that house all this information, they have to get them back and then go through them all and find out what changes the Maker made. Because we know that he did things like he stopped the radioactive spider from biting Peter Parker. So Peter Parker never became Spider-Man. He's just like a kid who's out there in the world just sort of doing his thing. It was small stuff like that, right? Imagine that on an entire planetary scale. Billions of lives that have been altered and changed irrevocably by one guy. They have to sort through all of that in order to get things to the way that they're supposed to be. The problem with this is that before anybody can really make a move, Thor's stabbed in the back. And he's actually stabbed in the back by Captain Britain, a member of the Illuminati. Because remember, one of the things that the Maker had set up here with the Illuminati team is that unlike the main Marvel universe where it's Reed Richards and Black Panther and Namor the Submariner and Professor Xavier, and then eventually Captain America, Black Bolt, which nobody knows why he was on that team, man. That guy's useless as tits in a Warhawk. But the fact remains, like, while they were there and they were kind of operating behind the scenes and they were sort of watching everything unfold and sharing information, preventing conflicts before they ever became major things, the Illuminati in the Ultimate Universe, or at least here in this line, they're completely corrupt. That what they do is this kind of like game of conflicts, right? That each of them leads an individual nation, and that they play this game game where like the Incredible Hulk's nation will be like quote unquote the bad guys, and that the other nations will band together and they'll defeat the Incredible Hulk's nation. But then after the Incredible Hulk's nation is defeated, then like the nation of another group will see this as an opportunity to seize control, and they'll become the bad guy. And what it does is it constantly keeps people distracted from the reality of the world that they live in, which is basically a giant box. And the people pulling the strings are controlling the lives that they live. In this instance, the Illuminati and the Maker. It's a very, very intricate and incredibly well-constructed ruse on the entire human race. But this guy, right, Captain Britain, is basically one of them. Now, what's so cool about this is that this guy, this captain, this is Henry Duggery, right? We know that from the original Ultimate Invasion issue number 3, but so it's not actually a descendant of Von Doom, at least not that we're aware of. But this could be one of those things where they restructure it and they basically turn him into Doctor Doom. But regardless, Iron Man just like puts his hand to this guy's face and fires off his repulsor blast. And while it's not enough to kill this guy, which that wasn't necessarily the intention, it is enough to incapacitate him. And in fact, we'll actually talk about the Doctor Doom connection here in a second, because following that, of course, Thor is basically taken by Tony Stark and Doctor Doom back to Stark Tower to try to offer some kind of medical assistance to get this guy healed, which, you know, I mean, being stabbed in the chest, despite being a god, some kind of medical attention, right? But what you do is you jump back to Latveria with Henry talking to the rest of the Illuminati. And what he says here is that he's been completely disfigured, right? Now, the reality is that it's just his eye, but the way in which he refers to it, the way in which he talks about it, this is a cornerstone of Doctor Doom, because one of the things that we had never seen until we got to Secret Wars in 2015 was the extent of Doctor Doom's facial damage. The reality here is that we didn't know for like decades in Marvel Comics. We didn't know if this guy was really disfigured or if Doctor Doom believed he was disfigured. We never knew the answer to that question because you never really saw him without his mask. And the very few times where you did see that, Marvel stories would contradict each other. And so because of this, this is one of those instances where like it ties kind of into that Doctor Doom mythos, right? I'm so disfigured, my face is torn up, you know, all that kind of stuff. And this guy's probably insanity and most likely hubris could very well lead him down that path. But we don't necessarily know. The reason for this and the reason why it's so cool is because what this does is it allows the Illuminati to concoct this plan where they can make Tony Stark look like the villain. And when the question's asked as to how they're going to do that, the Incredible Hulk, who leads the Children of Eternal Light, he says, "We regret the loss of your eye, Captain, but we have all been wondering exactly how to deal with the vacuum of power on that continent and to claim it for ourselves. I now see a path forward. He does not know it, but the boy has given us North America. All we have to do is take it." And when the question is asked, how, the response of Hulk is by committing the acts of a tyrant or worse, those of a terrorist. That in effect, what they're saying is that Tony Stark left New York, he left North America, he traveled to Latveria, a legitimate sovereign nation, and launched an attack against the person who leads it. He attacked a head of state. This is like you leaving North America and then flying to like Canada and attacking the Canadian Prime Minister. I don't remember his name. Was it Trudeau or something like that? Attacking that guy. It would be considered an act of political terrorism, right? And so because of that, it gives the ability for Latveria, quote unquote, to launch an attack against North America. And in fact, they specifically target Stark Tower. Now, when the question is asked by Viper, like, how do we sell it? The response of Hulk is, we do what we do. We tell lies so large that it's inconceivable that they are fabricated or false. And we cover that with just enough truth to sell it. We put his name on it, Stark. And when the question is asked, and you think people will believe it when we blame the boy, the response of Hulk is, of course they will. After all, while it's true that we are the ones who had control of the machines, it was his family who built them, right? So one of the things that you'll notice here is that like the Incredible Hulk in this reality is very manipulative and very, very dark. And in fact, it's a wild situation because in the original Ultimate Universe, the Incredible Hulk was basically mindless. He wasn't nearly as strong as his main Marvel Universe counterpart, but he was mindless. He was a cannibal. He would eat people. It was crazy. Like, he ripped Wolverine in half at one point. It was nuts, right? It was crazy, some of the stuff that he did. And so what you do is you pick up with this epilogue that takes place about a week later, right? And it's basically this news blip where it says, against a backdrop of global concern and international aid, it is with gratitude and great sorrow that we do our best to reflect on the events of last week. And while all of us here and millions around the world still wait for answers about what happened that day, for now, all we have are questions. Thousands remain missing. And while almost no physical evidence remains, local and international agencies using GPS, digital IDs, and other forensic data have been able to create a database of unfortunate souls who may have been in the blast of the terrorist attack. Below me, those potential victims' names are scrolling on the screen. People who, according to both the data and the experts who analyzed it, were believed to have been near the corporate headquarters of Stain Stark when the event occurred. Authorities need all the help they can get, so anyone who can confirm or deny any of these names, please contact them immediately, right? It makes it look like it was Stark that just launched an attack, that Stark's the bad guy here. And so this kind of continues on, right? It says, and while domestically, these are troubling, strange times, it seems that these events are not contained by our borders. In another part of the world, a car explosively collided with a bicycle in the streets, and while the driver remains in serious condition, the 15-year-old girl who was hit by the car escaped without a scratch on her. Elsewhere, in several of the dynastic strongholds of the Upper and Lower Kingdoms, there are reports of an outbreak of regional infighting and perhaps open insurgents. Due to the volatile nature of the conflict and an accompanying media blackout, there has been very little available coverage of the events, and all that we have, we are sharing with you now, and we will keep you updated as we learn more. It's just kind of this continued thing of painting these guys as villains. Now, this is when it gets cool, right? Because what this news guy says is he says, finally, we end tonight's coverage with the biggest underlying mystery regarding the recent attack. Why would a teenage boy commit this terrible act? Some have suggested that it was because of his father and godfather's recent passing. Others have assumed that it was some simple madness. We will continue to try and find answers to these questions, but as Tony Stark is believed to have been in the blast, it is safe to assume that he too has perished, and it's very possible we may never know why he did it, only for us to find out, seemingly, Tony Stark is completely alive. So the question has to be asked, since the Illuminati launched their strike, they made their first move. Now Tony Stark is on a quest for vengeance. And Tony Stark in the Ultimate Universe, the original Ultimate Universe, this guy was kind of crazy. He was really cool, right? So imagine it this way. Imagine that someone or a group of people launched an attack against Robert Downey Jr., Tony Stark. What do you think he would do in that situation if someone tried to kill him? So with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. The Ultimate Universe officially spins out in January, starting with Jonathan Hickman's Spider-Man. And I am excited about that. I am so hyped. Make sure you guys check the link to this playlist if you need to get caught up, and I will catch you all later. Peace.